We, the Lincoln University Emeritus Class of 1971, welcome our Lincoln University family and friends to an evening of American history. After all, African American history is American history. This is the story of Clotilda, the last slave ship to America, told through a documentary and the reflections of our 71 classmate, Mr. William Bill Green, a direct descendant of the Clotilda Africans and a former resident of Africatown. I am Mary Brown Scott, a member of Lincoln's Emeritus class, a retired African American Studies professor, and your moderator for the evening. To begin, we will have Miss Asha Burton, a popular music studies major with a focus on performance singing, and the granddaughter of Miss Ernell Spradley of 71, perform for us. Miss Burton attends Rider University in Lawrenceville, New Jersey, where she has just completed her freshman year. She is singing the Black National Anthem. Lift every voice and sing. The song will be followed by remarks from Lincoln University's president, Dr. Brenda A. Allen. Lincoln University is the first degree grant in historically Black college and university, or HBCU, in the country. Dr. Brenda A. Allen has made history by being the first alumni president of Lincoln University and the 14th president of this historic institution, founded in 1854 to educate African American men. Please stand for the anthem.
Lift every voice. And sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of our new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee. Lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadow beneath thine hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land.
It is an honor to offer opening remarks as we gather for the viewing of Clotilda, America's last slave ship and the start of Africatown. Thank you to the class of 1971 for sponsoring this event, and a special thanks to Mr. Bill Green, a proud member of the class of 1971, a descendant of enslaved Africans transported on the Clotilda, and treasurer of the Clotilda Descendants Association. The Black Lives Matter movement, spawned by the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murder in 2013, and fueled more recently by the deaths of all too many African Americans at the hands of law enforcement, has awakened yet another call for racial justice in society. As many in this nation grapple to understand how racial sins of the past continue to support racial injustice today, others are spending this time engaged in revisionist history, longing for the days when Black lives really didn't matter. The Clotilda documentary helps us to not forget the past. It tells the story of the evils of the slave trade and the strength, perseverance, and humanity of those who endured such evil. We will learn about how the survivors continue to cultivate West African cultural traditions, build a community of proud Black people loyal to their native land for generations. Most importantly, it tells a story that neither slavery nor Jim Crow or continued racism can break the human spirit. I hope that you enjoy the film and the discussion. Thank you.
Miss Rosalind Williams will introduce the documentary. Miss Williams is a native of Alabama who resides in Atlanta, Georgia. As a producer, writer, and founder of the Southern Rose Productions Company. This Atlanta-based film production company's mission is to bring inspiring stories to multicultural audiences across the globe. Southern Rose Production is dedicated to creating, developing, and producing quality films and books that educate, inspire, and empower. Please put your questions about the documentary in the chat section. Now we will have Ms. Williams.
You're muted, Ms. Williams.
We can't hear her.
I apologize. I didn't unmute my button. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here today. I am so grateful to be here and to share this fascinating story of Africatown with everyone. It's from first conception. When I first heard about it, I just thought this was such an amazing story that needs to be shared with the world. And so I introduced to you Africatown, Mr. William Green's story. This is their story, and they are a resilient, strong community, and I just really admire what they have been through and what they have achieved and what they're getting ready to do in the community. So I hope that you'll enjoy the documentary.
Our story begins as we've been led through the forest and tree branches rustling with the sounds of the chains that bind us one to another. We reach the shoreline of the Kingdom of Dahomey, present-day Republic of Benin. We are then loaded onto this huge ship called the Clotilda. The captain is afraid that King Glili is coming to the ship to attack him, so he leaves 15 of our tribespeople behind. They load us into the cargo hold. The door slams shut. There's only darkness. We begin to cross this vast ocean with the fear of not knowing where we are going or what awaits us and the pain of never seeing our loved ones again. The sounds of the water beating against the ship as the ship struggles through a hurricane. But there's only darkness that we can see in this slave hold. The women and the children crying out as we are packed and shackled. Death is preferred rather than the unknown that awaits us. This was just before my 20th birthday. This is our story. America takes its first big step in stopping the importation of Africans. In 1794, the United States makes it illegal to maintain or support ships involved in the slave trade within its ports. On January 1st, 1808, the United States bans the importation of Africans. The penalty for importing Africans is still only a misdemeanor. The fines associated with being involved with the slave trade do little to deter slave traders. The fines are paltry when compared to the profits made from the importation of Africans. After seeing little success, the United States government begins imposing stiffer monetary penalties for those involved in the slave trade. Additionally, slavers would now be faced with the seizure of their ships and up to 5 years in prison. Despite the considerable risk, Americans continue to operate in the slave trade. In fact, the increased risk makes the slave trade a more profitable business for those involved. Very few slavers are ever caught, and of those who are caught, few are ever convicted of a crime. Slave ships began using the ingenious strategy. Slavers simply abandon ship if they are pursued. Entire ships of Africans are thrown overboard to get rid of the evidence of the crime. The government simply cannot keep up with the slavers.
Just imagining how it must have felt, should I say, to be taken and away from your home by very strange looking people or by very strange people, to be torn apart from your family and then to be shackled and to be forced into a journey walking towards the coastline where you didn't know what was going to be your fate there. You were asking yourself questions about what went on, who is left home, who is alive, because you saw many fight in order for you to fight away. But then many were killed trying to defend every single individual. And then walking these paths to get to a sea, a shore, and see those ships for the first time in your life. It's like almost like seeing a UFO today, being put in those ships in the most undescribable conditions of complete chaos. What are the mental capacity that you needed to have, emotional strength that you needed to have in order for you to survive such experience, to be stacked like wood, one on top of each other, men and women, to have no ability to have personal space for hygiene, to witness people dying next to you, to witness people being beaten next to you, to be beaten yourself, to be abused, men and women to be sexually abused, because men also underwent tremendously traumatic experience, physical violence of all sort, to see people being thrown in the sea, either the sick or the more resistant, to have to decide between life or death, because every single behavior that you would have could make it that you would either be in the sea or on that boat. So between two evil, you had to choose the one that will basically carry on life. And many did. Many made it. So that just testified to the strength of character, the physical strength, the mental, emotional sanity of our ancestors. And if it does, then we have to ask, what was that system in which they grew, in which they developed to be such stellar characters, such amazing beings, that they can survive such brutality and also mental violence.
In the mid to late 1800s, the ports of Mobile, Alabama are some of the largest and busiest ports in the United States. The United States government is aware of the illegal activities going on in the Mobile ports. Both civil and military law enforcement are vigilant and active in suppressing illegal activities.
In 1808, this country said that's enough of the slave trade. And so they ruled the slave trade illegal, which meant that you couldn't bring any more slaves into this country from other countries. Now, the slave trade was still going on throughout the rest of the world, but here in this country, it was illegal. Slavery itself was legal, but you just couldn't have the slave trade. So they had enough slaves in this country to breed their own, basically. Now, just like any law, after they passed this law, people were still breaking it. And so the government 2 years later, in 1810, said, look here, we mean business. So if you're caught in the slave trade business, we're going to prosecute you, take you to court, and hang you. And so after that law was instituted, slavery was not recorded. Again, the slave trade was not recorded in this country, and unless it went underground. And it went that way for a long time until the Civil War began looming over the horizon. In 1859, some rich people, plantation owners and landowners and builders and businessmen were at the riverboat gambling, having a good time on Saturday like they always do, like they do now. People go down to the casino. Back then it was the riverboat. And the richest plantation owner and landowner in Mobile County name was Timothy Mayer. And he made a bet. He said, look here, I bet you I can bring slaves into this country right under the government's nose, and they'll never catch me. The other guy said, no, you can't. He said, yes, I can. They said, no, you can't. He said, yes, I can. They said, well, how much do you bet? He said, I bet you $100,000. Now, we put that to the calculator, and we figured out $100,000 back then is worth about $2.5 million today. And so they shook hands, and the bet was on.
In 1859, an infamous bet is made. Timothy Mayer and his brothers Jim, Byron, and John Dabney discussed the difficulty of bringing a ship full of illegal slaves to Mobile port. The government has been making it increasingly more difficult to import Africans through Mobile ports. Some are starting to say it's impossible. Timothy Mayer believes otherwise. He bets the group it can be done. Timothy wagers he could bring 100 Africans through the ports right under the government's nose. He bets a massive sum of $100,000. With the bet on, the men now need a ship and crew. This thing is more than a bet. It is also an investment opportunity. If Timothy is right, anyone involved stands to make a hefty profit, considering slaves are selling at a premium. With the money raised, the investors hired the best sea captain around, Captain William Bill Foster, and his crew to make the journey and pick up the cargo.
Just a quick pause.
disease caused by vitamin C deficiency. Scurvy affected poorly nourished slaves and the ship's crew. After 13 days at sea, Foster and his men can't take it anymore. The Africans in the cargo hold will not stop crying out. The cargo hold is completely dark, too tight, and the slaves are too cramped to move around or stand. Foster realizes he cannot deliver dead slaves, so he orders his men to let them out in small groups and walk them around the deck. The Africans need to move and bend their legs, otherwise they may suffer permanent damage. While on deck, enslaved cargo sees nothing but the ocean, no land in sight. They are terrified of not knowing where they are going or what will become of them. Despite the brief walks above deck, the slaves suffer greatly during their journey. At one point, the ship was forced to push through a hurricane, the waves tossing them to and fro and beating against the ship's walls, the winds howling. In deep despair, they scream and cry out in desperation. The slaves are wet, cold, hungry, and tired. They barely cling to life. Many of the slaves never recover from the traumas of the journey. Kasula Kudjo Lewis speaks of the traumatic pain and losses many times of being ripped from their native land, put into slavery, and then let go after the Civil War to defend for themselves. At times, he goes into deep thoughts and weeps.
That these people were put on a ship, tied down, brought here in the most inhumane condition, but it was not enough to stop their spirit.
After 70 days at sea, at nightfall on Sunday, July 8th, 1860, the Clotilda approaches Mobile Bay. Not wanting to get caught by the authorities, Captain Foster directs the ship up the Spanish River. He avoids the main channels and waterways. Captain Foster then directs the ship to a secluded location on the islands of the Mississippi Sound and into Mobile Bay. Once their location is secure, Captain Foster sends word to Timothy Mayer that they have arrived.
So on the trip back, to make sure that he was not caught, he came a long way up through the Caribbean and making stops as he came back to his country like he was a tourist, sailing up the Caribbean, enjoying the islands. Well, things being as they were, there are some good people in this country. And they got the word to the government that this bet was on. So the government people were out there waiting on them along the Mississippi River. Well, Timothy Mayer got the word down to Captain Foster he was coming up, that they were waiting on him. So they fashioned a backup plan. And the backup plan was, when you get close to the Mississippi, when you get close to the Mobile River, we will offload the slaves onto a riverboat, and they did, and bring them ashore on a riverboat. And the authorities were expecting a sailboat. Well, they offloaded them, and when they did that in the dark of the night, they sailed this brand new ship out to the middle of the Mobile Bay. They burned it and sank it. So they destroyed the evidence. So they never saw them bringing any people ashore, never saw the boat.
The United States authorities get word of the Clotilda and its cargo, and the authorities are on high alert and begins the search for the Clotilda. Captain Foster hides the cargo in the swamps for several days. Then he and his men quickly transfer their cargo onto a steamboat. Captain Foster then sets the Clotilda on fire to destroy any incriminating evidence. Mission accomplished.
Environmental and investigative reporter Ben Raines believes this is the resting place of the Clotilda, the last ship to bring slaves from Africa to North America.
You know, we've got an old ship in the right place.
And while other things need to be verified, Raines says he definitely believes it is the Clotilda.
It's circumstantial at this point. We won't know anything concrete until, they dig in, literally dig it up.
In a story for AL.com, Raines said he took a shipwright and 2 archaeologists to the site he discovered about 2 weeks ago when a cold north wind brought an extremely low tide, exposing the wood and metal indicative of the mid-1850s when the Clotilda was made. He believes there may be much more of the ship preserved in the mud.
You might still have all the inner construction down there, which would have included the pens where they had the captives, manacles. We might find, casks of different supplies.
The African slaves are now under the control of Timothy Mayer and his investors. the slaves are brought to John Dabney's plantation near Mount Vernon, and after a brief hiding period, the slaves are now distributed among all the investors, and some are sold to other plantation owners, but the majority of the African slaves are sent to Timothy Mayer's plantation. The federal authorities quickly find out about Mayer's bet and the ensuing illegal importation of the enslaved Africans. Mayer and his investors are arrested and charged with the illegal importation of Africans. Unfortunately, federal authorities cannot provide enough evidence to convict Mayer and his co-conspirators. The case is dismissed. After the Civil War and the emancipation, the former slaves are left to survive on their own. The Africans petition the United States government to send them back to their homeland, but their requests are denied. Eventually, the Africans decide to build their own community in the image of their homeland. Since they could not go back to their homeland, they asked Mayer to give them a plot of land, since he was the one who brought them here. Mayer refused. So on September 30th, 1872, they purchased a plot of land around Magazine Point and Plateau. The town came to be known as Africatown. Under the leadership of Gumpa Peter Lee, the Africans formed their own self-governing society. Disputes are resolved by a tribal chieftain. Illnesses are treated by their African doctor. The people speak their native language, have their own customs, and carry out their own tribal traditions. The men work as masons and carpenters, building their own homes. Hunting is plentiful in Alabama forests, and the people are able to adapt their hunting and fishing skills accordingly. The people also planted crops. The people of Africatown formed their own self-sufficient world. The men voted for the first time and became naturalized citizens on October 23rd, 1868.
Now, that group of people were not slaves long, because the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863 and the Civil War ended in 1865. So when they were set free on that land in which they came ashore, which is now Africatown. The Mayer family told them that they could take the land and live on. Well, they set up a community of their own. Now, they didn't know much about American law, but they knew about the law, the tribal law, where they came from. So the laws that they set up were based upon the laws of a tribe back in Africa, which made them the first community in this country of free slaves, in which the laws resemble the same laws as a tribe back in Africa. So that's second historical fact. Now, they knew the value of land, so they began to work and they began to purchase the land away from the Mayer family. They allowed them to purchase the land. And so they own most of the land in which they lived in.
That history felt in every corner of the town, one of the last and largest communities with direct descendants of slaves.
These are the actual slave quarters. My great-grandmother lived here, and her sister lived across, I don't want to say street, across the road.
Freed slaves built the Mobile County Training School.
And so this is the school that they built.
This is the school that they established, yeah.
And a church.
Union Baptist, this is the church that they established after they all got here.
Across the street from the church sits the graveyard where most of Africatown's founders and their descendants are buried, a powerful reminder of this community's past.
They're faced towards the east, and that's the direction that Africa is. And so the legend goes, they always wanted to go back home, so that's the way that they're facing.
crosses, long triangular teeth.
How do cats and dogs differ?
Not very much. They're much more gracile. Maybe that's it. Yeah, right at the end.
Yeah,
Give one more space there.
Dr. Joy DeGruy talks about post-traumatic slave syndrome in her 2005 book entitled Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, America's Legacy of Enduring Injury and Healing, or PTSS. Post-traumatic slave syndrome, or PTSS, describes a set of behaviors, beliefs, and actions associated with or related to multi-generational trauma experienced by African Americans that include, but are not limited to, undiagnosed and untreated post-traumatic stress disorder in enslaved Africans and their descendants. PTSS states that the centuries of slavery in the United States, followed by systematic and structural racism and oppression, including lynching, Jim Crow laws, and unwarranted mass incarceration, have resulted in multi-generational maladaptive behaviors, which originated as survival strategies. The syndrome continues because children whose parents suffer from PTSS are often indoctrinated into the same behaviors long after the behaviors have lost their contextual effectiveness. Dr. Joy DeGruy states that PTSS is not a disorder that can simply be treated and remedied clinically, but rather also requires profound social change in individuals as well as in institutions that continue to demonstrate inequality and injustice toward the descendants of enslaved Africans.
So with all these questions of what will my tomorrow be, it forces you to be able to live in the present, in the instant. And this is the kind of world we came from. This is the kind of culture we came from. We came from these cultures that honor the present moment. And that's, I think, where we got the strength to overcome. And we can see how it translates once they get on these foreign lands. So it's really a fantastic human accomplishment that needs to be put more forward to show the characters of the people we come from. And maybe we can also tap into that so we can recover from their experience and from our experience leading up to today.
The African diaspora may be a new term for many people. We don't hear it used very often in conversation or writings. The African diaspora is the term commonly used to describe the descendants of the mass enslavement and dispersion of peoples from Western and Central Africa during the transatlantic slave trades from the 1500s to the 1800s. The largest populations being shipped to Brazil, the United States, Haiti, and the Caribbean, such as Trinidad and Tobago, Cuba, Jamaica, and Puerto Rico.
This triangular trade left indelible marks on the lives of the enslaved Africans, also the Europeans, Native Americans, and all their descendants. And this tragic history has changed the world. It has shifted demographics and created new diasporas. And it has spread African heritage, language, culture, spiritual traditions all around the world.
Cudjoe Kazula Lewis is one of the last living survivors of the original Africatown population. He was captured just before his 20th birthday. He becomes a spokesperson for the people of Africatown. He shares his story. He tells of the horrific journey across the ocean, the days on a plantation, and the rise of Africatown. Cudjoe Kazula Lewis will cry profusely every time he would think about or speak about his family and villagers and how they were brutally murdered. He missed his homeland, always hoping that one day they could return. When given interviews, Cudjoe Kazula Lewis would always insist that the writers use the traditional African names of the Africatown people so that families in Africa would know they survived. Cudjoe Kazula Lewis died in 1935 at the age of 95. His resting place is in Africatown's historical cemetery.
A cast iron image pays tribute to the last surviving member of the final slave ship that came into America. Cudjoe Lewis is one of more than 100 slaves captured in West Africa and brought here on the Clotilda in 1859 after a Mobile businessman made a bet he could sneak them in illegally.
Remember the story, but don't hold it against him, because if you do, you're going to become the master of your hate. And you're going to be a slave to yourself. And that's the worst kind of slavery to do, when you have self-induced slavery.
Israel Lewis III is the great-great-grandson of Cudjoe Lewis. He talks of how his ancestors formed their own governing community in North Mobile, Africatown.
Our ancestors actually came from a culture, a secret society that was set right in the middle of Mobile society. And the Mobile people didn't even know it. They didn't realize these people had their own language, their own religion, their own outlook of life.
The ancestors were able to move forward through it all with resilience, strength, and pride. The spirit of Africatown's ancestors still lives on today in the descendants of the historical place called Africatown, located in Plateau, 3 miles north of downtown Mobile, Alabama.
The story of Africatown is a very important story because it's the story of our resistance. And it seems like we speak a lot about our time in captivity and in forced labor camp. But we don't speak enough of all the resistance movement. Many gave their lives fighting relentlessly, all throughout the time of captivity till the end, till today. Africatown is one of the beacon experience to show that we will not accept those terms. Haiti is another example. Maroons in Jamaica is another example. I was just in Brazil. We have the Minas Gerais. They were hiding in the mountain. They created community where they kept the language, they kept the rights, whatever it was. So this is why Africatown has to be really studied and has to be exposed much more in the teaching to adults or children, but it has to be a story, a narrative that we keep on hearing about.
I am so proud to say I'm a descendant. That was never, I won't say never, that wasn't a word that I used maybe 10, 15 years ago. So I'm proud to say I'm a descendant. No, I'm not just a descendant, I'm a direct descendant.
My great-great-granddaddy was named Charlie Lewis, came on the last slave ship, the Clotilda. It's a proud moment for me because I am an American. Because of him coming here and getting his citizenship and buying land and property to make us whole.
In the spring of 2019, an archaeological survey team led by James Jim Delgado, Dr. Delgado, identified the wreckage of the Clotilda. The 19th century wooden schooner would show itself reappearing to the team's 21st century technology. Dr. Delgado is an authority in maritime archaeology, a world-renowned archaeologist, in fact, historian, journalist, educator, and museum director. His career spans nearly 5 decades of passionately investigating the past and sharing discovery and history worldwide. Dr. Delgado joined us at Five Rivers Delta Resource Center on the Causeway to talk about the Clotilda, its significance, and its reappearance.
No one person found Clotilda. In fact, I don't think Clotilda was ever truly lost. One of the things that we've noted is that even at the time, we believe people knew exactly where it was. Understanding, of course, that all of the government officials who searched for it would in short time become Confederates. Many of them were themselves slave owners. And so the real question is, was it truly being hidden, or was it merely being put under the water so that it was not directly, physically there to confront the government officials who could say, I looked and I didn't find it. To that end, I think there were people who through the years knew exactly where it was. And the clearest evidence of that is the fact the wreck has been dynamited, and according to historian John Sledge, that happened decades ago. The Mayer family did it. They told him to recover some of the value of the copper and some of the iron in the wreck. And that's exactly what we found. So it never truly was lost. It merely had to be found by an exhaustive process of looking at a variety of wrecks that are there because it sits in a ship graveyard. And that approach had to be a careful scientific one because this is a very important ship.
William, you can add a little more plate. Let a little more of the film play, William.
Alrighty.
Yeah, it was not at the credits yet. Well, William, if it's too difficult to restart or start back, we can continue.
People, I love you. We're family. Yeah, you and me. Hey, we'll make it out. No matter what the cost. We're family. Yeah, you and me. Hey, and we'll make it through the pain, the rain, and all the trouble by ourselves. Oh, oh. People, I love you. I love you. We are dying. We are dying. They are lying. We're being shot and haunted. Why you hating me? was trying to be, great as I can be, grow with one another, living happily, but you hurt me, why not work for peace? Now I am from Zion, I am a king, and you're a queen. We'll make it through it all, no matter what the cost. We're family, yeah, you and me. We'll make it through the pain and rain and all the suffering by ourselves. Oh, 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 oh. My people, I love you. I love you. Why we hurting? Now you're loving. Now you're willing to love the world. Can you feel the grace, family? Breathe another day, and we take for granted that y'all gave us all new life. But we need to learn to love each other. Humanity. Have a peaceful word to say. Have a peaceful place for kids to run. Yeah, you and me, hey, we'll make it do it all. No matter what the cost, we're family. Yeah, you and me, hey, we'll make it through the pain and rain and all the trouble by ourselves. People, I love you. My people, I love you, my people. I love you, my people. I feel your pain, people. I feel your pain, people. We're family.
Okay, Mary.
All right. Mr. William Bill Green is a native of the Africatown section of Mobile, Alabama. He brings his reflections of his lived experiences there to us this evening. Bill is the third generation of African shipmates on board the Clotilda. He's a graduate of the historic Mobile County Training High School, the first high school accredited in Alabama for the education of African Americans, as well as being a 1971 graduate of Lincoln Emeritus class. Presently as treasurer of the Clotilda, Mr. Green's mission is to help the association, the Clotilda Descendants Association, to form into a cohesive body for action and preservation for Clotilda's history and memories. There will be a brief commentary between Mr. Bill Green and Ms. Williams. And there are some questions waiting for both of you.
Thank you, Mary. My name is William Bill Green. I am a third generation descendant of two of the occupants of the Clotilda, Osi and Ina Kibi, shipmates on the Clotilda who were my great grandparents. The Clotilda is documented as the last ship to bring Africans to these shores for the sole purpose of enslaving them. The Clotilda landed in Mobile with its cargo of 110 Africans on July 8, 1860. You heard the folklore and romanticized reasons for the trip to Africa was the result of a drunken bet between Timothy Mayer, a rich ship merchant in Mobile, and some Northerners in a bar or on a steamboat in Mobile. Now, it is my considered opinion that Timothy Mayer was much more calculating than that. I believe the reason for the expedition was pure and simple. greed, and profit. When you could purchase an African in Africa for about $50 to $100, sell them in America for $900 to $1,500, you clearly see the motivation. Now, he may have had a side bet with them after he bragged about his illegal intentions, but there's no way you spent over $50,000 in those times on an illegal voyage just to win a bet. The Clotilda was built in 1856, and they began outfitting it for the illegal voyage in 1859. It was staffed with 11 sailors and Captain William Foster. They had stocked provisions for a 3-month voyage to Africa and $9,000 in gold to purchase the Africans. So I wish they would stop reciting this fantasized notion that it was the result of a bet, which does not make it any less vile or heinous. Now, the Civil War started in April 1861, less than a year after the Clotilda with its 110 occupants landed on these shores, and the war lasted until 1865. After the Civil War, many of the Clotilda enslaved Africans returned to Mobile area to settle. They first asked the mayors to send them back to Africa, their homeland, but of course he refused. So they saved their money and purchased land from him. And about 32 of them established their own community in 1870 and named it Africatown. Now, I should point out that they were not the first Africans or former slaves to settle in the area, but they were the most organized because they were the most recent to America and remembered their community structure back in Africa. They built their own church in 1873. You heard Union Baptist Church, and it supposedly got its name because the Union soldiers were the first one to inform them that they were free on the steamboats traveling between Mobile and Montgomery. And they started a school in that church in 1880, which would later become the Mobile County Training School. In 1890, the elders and the community partitioned the Mobile County school system to build a school. In 1900, residents gave land to build a school. My great-grandfather, Fred Green, was one of the 2 people who donated land to build a school. In 1910, the Mobile County Training School was the first school certified for Blacks in the state of Alabama. I am a 1967 graduate of Mobile County Training School in Africatown. I was born in Africatown in a section called the New Quarters. You can guess why it was called the New Quarters, because that was a euphemism for the new slave quarters. Now, it is my contention that the New Quarters was probably the first place the freed Africans lived before they were able to save their money and buy their own land. These shotgun homes that they rented were still owned by the Mayer family, who commissioned the trip to Africa. It was close enough to the paper mill where a number of them worked so they could walk to work. And the final clue I have on that this possibly is the first landing place for the freed slaves. The street that I grew up on was named Ina Avenue, I-N-N-I-E, named after my great-grandmother, the first wife of O.C. Keeby. Now, maybe this may have been a twisted idea of the mayors of honoring them, or maybe the Africans had gotten together and wanted to name the street after his first wife. In the height of irony was my father, the grandson of Africans brought to these shores for enslavement, was still paying rent to the grandson of the man who had commissioned and financed the trip. Now, my great-grandparents had passed before I was born, so I have no memory of them. Their daughter, my grandmother, Mama Sarah, was alive, and I remember every Sunday after church, my father would take all the little ones to visit with his mother. Now, sadly, I do not remember her telling stories of her parents or growing up. And as kids are known to be, I doubt if I would have had the patience to sit and listen to her anyway. Admittedly, it was not until after I realized much later what a privilege I had of knowing so much about my family history and ancestors. I was in an African American history class in college at the Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. And the name of the ship Clotilda in Mobile came up in class as the last slave ship to America. Now, my name on the yard was Mobile. I guess my classmates were not very creative, or they just were lacking in imagination and named me after the place that I was from. And my classmates in the class jokingly said, "Hey, Mobile, did your people come over on the Clotilda?" And I said, yes, they did. Of course, it was met with disbelief and skepticism, but it was a source of pride that I knew where my people came from and realized how many African Americans have no idea of their ancestors or their lineage. When it was first thought that the wreckage of the Clotilda was found in January 2018, I was interviewed for an appearance on the CBS Morning Show with Gail King. I believe that is when I introduced many of my Lincoln classmates to my relationship to the Clotilda. I think I emailed them saying that I was going to appear on the CBS Morning Show, along with classmates from high school and every family and friend I could. Now, it turned out not to be the Clotilda. However, the Clotilda was found a year later in May 2019. And it's my contention that I believe too much interest is being paid to the recent findings of the remnants of the ship and not enough to the Africans occupants in Africatown. The documentary you saw does an excellent job of capturing the extensive nature of the trip and the aftermath. I commend Rosalind Williams for an excellent piece of work. Now, at this time, I would like Ms. Williams to please join me on the screen. And Rosalind, the first question I would have, okay, how were you first introduced to the story of the Clotilda in Africatown?
In May of 2016, we were attending an African-American trip, my hometown church, and we were in Washington at the National African Museum there. And on the way back, the coordinator, she asked a series of questions. So when she spoke of the Clotilda in Africatown, and I was so intrigued by it, and I never heard of it. And I'm 20 minutes, I live 20 minutes away from Africatown, and I never heard of Africatown, nor the Clotilda being the last slave ship. So I was so fascinated with the story, I started researching while I was on the bus, and 8-hour trip, I was just researching. So it took me a little over a year, and then I decided, okay, this has to be told, because if I didn't know of the Clotilda and Africatown being 20 minutes away, I'm sure a lot of people did not know. And at that time, a lot of, the Ben Raines got hold of the story, and he started sharing the story as well. But I think this is a story that it really needs to be told worldwide. It's a fascinating story.
Now, I'm a proud graduate of the class of 1971 from the Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, the first degree issuing HBCU. Lincoln was founded or established as Ashman Institute in 1854, 6 years before the arrival of the Clotilda on these shores. And this is our 50th Emeritus Year celebration from this great institution. I want to thank my classmates in the university for having my story as a part of the reunion celebration. And of course, special thanks to the class of 71 for having this as their kickoff celebration for the Emeritus Year reunion celebration. I want classmates to please enjoy this and stay around for further questions and answers and interplay between Rosalind Williams and me. Classmates, enjoy, and I look forward to seeing you on the other planned activities for this weekend. And thanks also to the Reunion Planning Committee. And thanks especially to Dr. Allen for her introductory comments. Now, and I also want to say hello to all of my family and classmates of Mobile County Training Schools and all fellow residents of Africatown, current and former. All the residents of Mobile on this webinar, and the many organizations and people that are fighting the good fight on behalf of Africatown: CHESS, AHPF, CDC, Mobile County Training School Alumni Association, Commissioner Ludgood, and Representative Clark. And forgive me if I've left someone out. And also hello to my fellow Clotilda descendants and the Clotilda Descendants Association for who are fighting the fight to make sure that we'll never forget. And for donations, go to our association. Please visit the ClotildaStory.com. That's THECLOTILDA, ClotildaStory.com. Okay, and Dr. Excuse me, I keep referring to you as Dr. Rosalind. But how did you get to the film completed, and how was it financed?
A lot of my savings, and then I had some business partners. I called some business partners when I discovered, heard about the story, and I said, look, this is a story that we really need to share. So a lot of my business partners, they contributed. I had a lot of sponsors, family and friends that they put funds together. And we almost had a big contributor, which was Coca-Cola. They were really interested in the story, and they said it was a really good fit. But once they sent it here to Atlanta for someone to sign off, the lady didn't feel like it was a good fit. But so what we did was we just put what we had together, and we just told the story. I actually wanted more in the story, but we ran out of funds, and we decided, okay, it's not going to be perfect. We just have to put what we have together. And now I've actually written a story for a motion film. So I am pitching it to producers so we can get it on the big screen.
We have several questions for you guys. Bill, one of the questions was, what occupation did your family engage in Africatown?
The first ancestors, Osi and Ina Kibi, and Osi is spelled O-S-I-A for your records, was a farmer. Osi was a farmer, and Ina stayed home and took care of the kids. Eventually, a number of them, as in Africatown, worked for the paper mills. Africatown is surrounded, at that time, was surrounded by these humongous paper mills, International Paper, Scott Paper, and the majority of the people that lived in Africatown, at least the men, worked at the paper mills. And as I said, the paper mills were very convenient from the new quarters because it was actually within walking distance from the new quarters to the paper mills.
Okay, we had another question about the documentary itself, Ms. Williams. They want to know how they may see it again.
I can share that link, and it's actually a password to go with it, and I'll be more than happy to share it. I want to get it out to everyone, so everyone would have knowledge of Africatown.
Someone, I might just say everybody was really very excited about this documentary. They loved it. Kudos to both of you for it. Another question was, you mentioned, Mr. Green, that initially the Africans kept their religion. So one of the questions was, why did they convert to Christianity and start the Union Missionary Baptist Church?
Well, at first, when they were freed, as I said, they were in the area, and there were other churches, other free blacks already in the area. And they initially attended other Christian churches before establishing their own. After attending other churches in the area, they had the idea they wanted to start their own, and hence the Union Baptist Church.
Okay, great. Someone also said that there were grants available, and that's for both of you, through NEH for the type of work that you've done. So you might start to get your grant writing people to apply for those grants.
Since the confirmed finding of the remnants of the Clotilda, Africatown has received enormous attention over the past 2 years. So there's been grants proposed from the Smithsonian Institution, the National Preservation, the actual African American Cultural Center, and numerous others. But it's going to be a process where we actually have to do serious consideration of what is being offered, and it's just not one that's where they come in and rob the land, rob the people, rob the historic effects.
Mr. Kenneth Kelly just put a note in chat that the documentary will be shown again on this Saturday by Lincoln University. So those who are interested might get the link and information. Ms. Williams, you were going to explain, or somebody was going to explain, the woman in the documentary, the queen from the Republic of Congo.
Yes, Queen Diami, and she is actually a king. A lot of people, kind of shake their head when they say, she's actually a king. She was crowned a king, but her title, she normally says Queen Diami. I still keep in touch with her. She's on IG if you want to follow her, and I actually have her bio. She's also she is has a degree in economics. She is a psychologist. She's a fantastic person, and she has a mandate to connect all the Africans throughout the diaspora, and that's her mandate, and that's how we connected. And she was so interested in the story. But if you follow her, she can give you a little more information about it. She is definitely actually a king, and she can explain a little bit more about their culture than I can actually. And I did have more footage of her, but the camera person lost some of the footage, and she explained a lot of the culture and information from Africa.
Thank you. Mr. Green, someone wants to know the other noted descendants of the Africatown, the Clotilda, Descendant Association. Are there other noted descendants you'd like to share with the audience?
There are over, when we started attempting to track and trace the descendants from the Clotilda, they are scattered far and nigh. Our last count, there was close to 1,000 documented descendants of the Clotilda. Now, the ones, of course, I was most familiar with were the ones that stayed in the Africatown area that I attended school with, and eventually went to college. But I can't think of any particular ones that I can point to as a noted descendant of the Clotilda. Sorry.
Well, I remember Questlove and Lula Beatty is saying the same thing from roots
Finding your roots.
Yeah,
with Dr. Henry Louis Gates.
Yeah, Dr. Henry Louis Gates and roots.
And I, as a matter of fact, I actually contacted Dr. Gates long before Questlove did, and he did a write-up on me. I wrote to him asking if he could do a research, first of all, on all 110 occupants. He said that was too broad of a subject matter. And so I narrowed it down, said, okay, on my family, do you have a documentation that my family is truly descendants from the Clotilda? He did an excellent write-up in partnership with some other people of it, and it had hyperlinks to the headstones of O.C. Kibi and the headstones of Ina Kibi and the marriage license of O.C. Kibi's second wife with Cudjoe Lewis as his best man. So yeah, he does do extensive work on the descendants. However, I mean, Questlove, not to cast any aspersions on him for sure, but he never lived in Africatown. I don't think he ever knew of course, that he was from Mobile, or his family was from, or his family or his people was from Mobile. Then again, maybe they weren't from Mobile or Africatown, because of the 110, only about 30 or 40 settled in Africatown. There were a number of them that was dispersed to northern Alabama, Selma, Montgomery, Alabama. And of the 110, I think only about 40 to 50 or 60 of them stayed in the Mobile general area.
All right, you kind of anticipated the other question, which was how many of the descendants are still in Africatown? 50 or 60, is that what you're saying?
Oh, no. I mean, originally of the ancestors that were on the slave ship, only about 60 of them stayed around the Mobile area, and only 32 of them, 30 to 32 of them started Africatown. But current day Africatown, at its heights, it had a population of 10 to 12,000. Current day, the population is only about 2,000. And Africatown has been affected by a number of things that affect other communities in America. It's kids grow up and no longer do they stay in the homes or stay where their parents live. They go away to college and sometimes never return. So a number of the homes in Africatown has come under disrepair because of heirs that have moved away and no longer pay the taxes or return.
Okay. All right, I think that's most of the questions.
Okay, I did want to share share my screen if I could, William. This was when I was interviewed by CBS Morning Show.
You should have access.
Okay. And I want to share with sound. I want to make sure.
Those remains were found in Mobile Bay. Ben Rains from AL.com shot video of the wreckage of the Clotilda. That's buried in the mud. Rains spent 3 months studying historical records, the captain's journal, and some insurance documents. If the remains are proven to be the Clotilda, then that means raising the wreckage. Descendants of slaves brought to America on the ship do still live in the Mobile Bay area.
I take pride in the fact that they were able to survive that passage to America, regardless of how you got here. They are your ancestors. Oftentimes, maybe not under the best of circumstances, but yet you are here because of them.
What happens next is going to be up to state and federal officials. Rains says the remains are the right size and the right location, and they are the right age.
Okay, the picture you saw at the end of that clip were pictures of the son of O.C. and Annie Keevy, Joyful Keevy, his wife and daughter.
Okay. All right, we are just so full of information here. We want to give a special thanks to all the participants, especially Mr. Bill Green, who was willing to share his story, and Ms. Rosalind Williams and the Southern Rose Production Company for producing Mr. Green's story. LU President Dr. Brenda Allen for keeping Lincoln University in the forefront of racial justice. And the melodic sounds of Asha Burton, the Clotilda Descendants Association, and Mr. William Struther, technician for this event. So we thank all of you. We've really gone to school this evening on the history of a group of people that many of us have just been introduced to. Thank you so much.
And I want to add my final thanks to the class of 71 for bringing my story to the class through this documentary and my commentary. It was the kickoff event. And as I said, I hope the many of the other events that the participants of the class make sure you attend that as well. And last but not least, I want to thank my wife of almost 38 years, Dorothy Green, for her patience with me and her love and dedication in my support of my many endeavors. Thank you, Dorothy. I appreciate that.
All right. Thank you. Goodbye.
Okay. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, you guys.